Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. We have some breaking news for Michigan fans as three big names have entered the transfer portal. Dill, we've been talking about what kind of names and players might be hitting the transfer portal. When you look at this Michigan depth chart, it's very deep. There's a lot of competition at a lot of positions, and guys who are on our 2 and 3 deep could start at other Power 5 schools. So you kind of had a feeling this would happen. We're going to be talking a little bit about the three players departing, and then we're going to be talking about the more exciting portion of it for the Michigan fans, at least. Who are we going to be targeting during this transfer portal window? Again, before we get into it, just want to say thank you to you guys, Michigan fans especially. We got 2 potential recruits coming tomorrow, so stay tuned to that. But if you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Our favorite thing to do is talk Michigan ball, so if you guys do enjoy it, lock in, subscribe to the channel. We appreciate all the support. Dale, I'm going to kick it off to you. Let's start with talking about the 3 names that have hit the portal from Michigan and RJ Moten, AJ Henning, and Nikhai Hill-Green.
So, I mean, just to start off, like Nikhai Hill-Green and RJ Moten have been very productive players in that year of the Michigan resurgence when they finally beat Ohio State. Those 2 played a lot of snaps, were very involved in those big games.
But AJ Henning, too, on the end around.
Yeah, no, and AJ Henning obviously hasn't played a ton on offense. He's been on special teams, so he's been more of a reserve player compared to these other 2, but has certainly made his plays for Michigan. But I mean, you look at what's happened at linebacker with the emergence of Colson and the signing of Houseman. There's just not a lot of room for Nikhai Hill-Green, and same thing at safety with Rod Moore and Makari Page becoming the 2 kind of clear leaders for that job. These are 2 guys, and you said right off the rip, they're really, really good players, and they don't necessarily belong sitting on the bench at this point in their careers. And this is why the transfer portal is like good in a sense. They deserve
to go play at another. Completely agree. And I was saying, we were talking about this earlier. This is exactly what, in my mind, the transfer portal should be used for. Like, these guys have played multiple years for Michigan. They're very good players who deserve shots at significant playing time. And they're good enough to go to most Power 5 schools and be starters at those next schools. I mean, RJ Moten was a guy that people were talking about as an NFL draft prospect after 3 years. So all 3 of these guys are really, really good players that are just kind of gotten buried in the depth chart, whether it's the transfers coming in, younger recruits kind of taking their job. And in my mind, like you're wishing all 3 of them the best because they've been leaders for this program. And all 3 of these guys have been leaders in this program. And they're off to find kind of more opportunity to show what they can do. Because quite frankly, at Michigan and how this depth chart shakes out, it wasn't really there.
Yeah, and that's pretty much it. Like these aren't necessarily like, I don't think giant losses for the program necessarily. No. It's like at this point, like let the younger guys kind of be in the 2 deep and be the guys who get on the field next. Because it just makes sense. It makes sense for everybody in their careers. And like, yeah, wish them well. And now it's on like to see what Michigan does in their window and what they're
that's what I want to get to. That's the more fun part. In Michigan, that was about as active as we've seen Michigan in the transfer portal in December and January. I don't think they'll be as active in this portal window. I think maybe, and that's, I guess, to start with, is we've talked about how strong this culture is for Michigan and how very few players hit the portal in the winter session because it just seems like everyone wants to go win a Big Ten championship. They want to go win a national championship. This locker room seems to be about as close and tight as anywhere in the country. And I think that's why you didn't see a lot of guys hit the portal then. So I guess we'll start off with, how many players do you even want Michigan to take in this transfer portal window?
I mean, this like comes down to the question. I don't know enough about like locker room dynamics, but if you are going to make any threat to like, oh, who are these guys joining late? They weren't here in the spring grinding it out with us. And like that sounds very cliche in my mind. So I have a hunch these players don't really feel that way. That if they can get a really good player at a spot of need, I have a feeling like a Blake Corum, a Donovan Edwards, JJ, in those other guys who are kind of here to win their national title, I think they would very much welcome it. So I think they could probably take a few, but honestly, there's not that many positions in need. And just because of how active they were in the winter, where they pretty much filled out their missing spots, if you will.
Yeah, at the 2 positions that kind of jump out at me, certainly not the offensive line. And we already had a good offensive line. We go get 3 guys in the transfer portal who are like phenomenal offensive linemen. Like we're set there. I mean, take any more guys on the offensive line, you might be squeezing some young guys who you're excited about out of the program. 2 positions that jump out at me, and we've talked at length about how deep and complete this roster and depth chart is for Michigan. probably cornerback and wide receiver. And I want to start with the cornerback position because that is probably like you have Will Johnson, you have Mikey Sansfield in the nickel. Is Marion Walker going to be ready to lock down the other side of the field? If Michigan doesn't take a cornerback in this transfer portal window, two things. One, you're feeling pretty good about where Marion Walker is in terms of his development as cornerback.
And that's the thing, because to me, it's like it would make a ton of sense to go get a veteran corner, like a guy who's maybe a senior or an upperclassman at least. I don't necessarily think they should be targeting guys who haven't played much because that doesn't necessarily bring them much closer to what they are. But if they can go get in a guy like Storm Duck is obviously the one that he just left Penn State and he played really, really good football at UNC for a while. And so a guy like that would certainly feel like it makes sense at the corner spot because you kind of give him the 1 year, let the young guys develop and give you some stability in a position where you kind of don't know what you have right now.
Exactly what I was thinking. I think if you're attacking a transfer, you don't want a kid from the 2022 or maybe even 2021 class because you want a guy that can play ball at this level. Because if Marion Walker is going to be as talented as a guy you can have at that spot, you just got to make sure he's ready to play in 2023 because this is a national championship year. You can't go trotting out a cornerback who's not ready. First guy that came to my mind, Jaden Davis, offered him out of high school. He's from Florida, 2019 guy, has played a lot of football for the Oklahoma Sooners. He's a very good athlete and kind of fits the mold of what you just said. He's a steady Eddie guy. So if Marion Walker kind of needs some more development, you feel good about a veteran in Jaden Davis who's played a lot of football at a high Power 5 level to kind of come in and kind of steady the ship there at that other cornerback spot.
And that's really all they should be looking for. Again, I don't think they should be looking for guys who are going to supplant everyone else on the roster just because that does feel like that could be very disruptive to the culture building process, if you will. And I could see I just committed. Now you're signing this guy. And I think Jim's aware of that. That feels like his approach to what he's been doing with the transfer portal, taking a guy like Olu at a position that they lost a starter in Andrew Vastardis, and they want an older vet to come in for a year. And he obviously did his thing. He was a big part of that Ohio State win on those 2 blocks that sprung Donovan Edwards. So that kind of model, I feel like it makes sense. That's kind of what they've done. They've done in the winter with those grad transfers from Stanford and some of their acquisitions. But
the other guy you mentioned is Storm Duck. He's played a lot of football. He's another guy that, we were talking about him as like a top 50 prospect in the 2023 NFL draft before a tough season. Like this guy can play football. He's played at a high level at UNC, transferred to Penn State for the spring, and now back in the portal. He's another guy that I take a look at. And then probably the most interesting guy, we offered him out of high school. He's a younger kid, so it doesn't really fit that mold. Lorenzo Styles from Notre Dame. He was a guy that I remember last summer banging the table for, played wide receiver for Notre Dame, but now talking about switching to the defensive side of the ball. So it's like both positions of need for Michigan he could potentially play. He's a little bit less of a surefire thing than a guy like Jaden Davis or a guy like Storm Duck, but we were in his recruitment coming out in 2021. He's from Ohio. Like that one seems like it would make a lot of sense whether he's playing wide receiver or cornerback.
In just a transition, I think at a point, the wide receiver is the only other position I'd even take a look at in terms of bringing in another guy. And frankly, he is kind of a surefire wide receiver. I don't know exactly what happened this year, but you saw towards the end of 2021, he was playing really good football for Notre Dame.
Super talented kid. You listen to the Notre Dame beat writers and the practice notes. Like this guy was supposed to be like the wide receiver 1 for Notre Dame, and then obviously kind of all fell apart with Drew Pine at quarterback. But this guy has a lot of talent, and that's kind of what Michigan needs. Is kind of a bigger body guy who can stretch the field. Lorenzo Styles kind of checks all those boxes. And the last guy that I'll shout out, and I don't even, this one's more fun. Like we offered him out of high school. He's a former top 100 recruit out of the 2020 class in Xavier Henderson. Bigger body guy who has some good speed, ran track out of high school. Offered him when he was coming out. He would also be a guy that I think, at least from a talent standpoint, it's all there. And he just never really had the opportunity to put it together at Florida. I think that's why you see him in the portal. 2 interesting things. One, it looks like Miami's kind of in the lead here. He's from Miami, wanted to go to Miami out of high school, but he can't go back to the SEC. And there's not many teams that beat out Michigan on the recruiting trail or in the transfer portal window that are outside of the SEC. So I wouldn't be surprised if Michigan at least contacts Xavier Henderson as potentially being a
The
fit.
one real allure, though, that Michigan has that not many other schools besides like Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama, and some of those other teams, or USC, is Michigan's very much in it for contending. Like Miami is years away from being really tough, I think. And some other team, even like a Tennessee that could take a look at a wide receiver. You don't know if they're going to be that team again. They obviously had a very good year, but they got gutted in a sense. Michigan's kind of right there. So these guys who are like, this is kind of their last year of college football. It feels like if you want to play really high level corner or be a kind of a difference maker at wideout, I feel like Michigan's got an attractive offer if they're going to make them. And again, I'm not sure Michigan's going to be active at all. It might not be.
Well, it is going to be intriguing, and I think we'll get more of a clear answer once we see some other names hit the portal from Michigan, which I think you'll see. Although I don't know, those were kind of when we talked about it a couple months ago as like potential guys that could be transferring. Those were the names that were brought up. Guys who are very good football.
See a lineman, I think, hit one of the typicals, like a Trente Jones or Carson Barnhart. Those are two guys who might not have an inside track exactly at playing, but are guys who start at a fair amount of Big Ten schools, a fair amount of ACC schools, and that's
probably the spot.
See them shedding someone, but again, I just can't imagine guys are going to leave. Like the guys who needed to come back were all drafted or back to Michigan. You're not going to lose a Keegan or a Zinter or Cornelius Johnson, I don't think.
I agree. You're probably losing one of the offensive linemen, Trente Jones, Carson Barnhart, two guys that started for Michigan last year significantly that are good enough to play on most Power 5 schools that just, because you brought in so many talented offensive linemen and you have so many young offensive linemen in the pipeline, one thing I'll say I'm a little nervous about, and this would hurt, is a guy like Giovanni Alhadi, Raheem Anderson, those guys transferring out. That was the one thing, as exciting as it is to get some of those proven guys in the transfer portal in the winter. Like every time I watch Giovanni Alhadi, whether he's playing in kind of mop-up duty or in spring practice, like this dude is dominant. He's going to be a very good offensive lineman. So I hope we don't lose out on any of the young guys. But again, if a guy like Trente Jones, Carson Barnhart want to hit the portal, like I think it'd make a lot of sense just because you're good enough to go play at a lot of other Power 5 schools. You can go out, try to make your money, show what you can do. That'll do it for the boys again. We'll be kind of monitoring this Michigan situation, seeing what other guys hit the portal, talking about some more targets. But at this point, cornerback, wide receiver, kind of I wouldn't even call them glaring needs, but positions Michigan could take a look at in the portal. Again, appreciate you guys checking us out. If you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.